Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. I hope the week's gone well. Political reflections. Let's reflect a little bit more on what has been some seismic, fluid events in Africa. Algeria kicked off first, Sudan second. Feels Gladwellian, tipping point type sort of situation. Sudan's army overthrew President Omar al-Bashir, who I called a Harry Houdini, and announced it would rule the oil-producing North African nation through a military council for the next 2 years. That is entirely improbable that they can even last that 2-year period. But clearly this is a defensive measure by forces of reaction, and they think they can just replace the face. Nobody survives hyperinflation, currency crisis, claims another strongman. This is Paul Wallace of Bloomberg. For autocratic leaders seeking lessons from the toppling of Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, avoiding a currency crisis may be the key to survival. One of the root causes of the 75-year-old's downfall was his inability to manage a shortage of foreign exchange that sent inflation soaring and hammered living standards. Sudan's woes can be traced back to the succession of South Sudan in 2011, which saw it lose almost all its oil fields and 60% of fiscal revenue, according to the Institute of International Finance. The central bank devalued the pound almost 40% to 47.5 per dollar in October, but it was too little, too late. The currency's black market rate tumbled again and now stands at around 75 against the dollar. Inflation is almost 120%, according to Steve Hanke. In Venezuela, where inflation is more than 1,000,000%, making the bolivar all but worthless, Maduro has managed to hold on, thanks to continued support from the military and outside powers such as Russia. But if Sudan and Zimbabwe are a guide, he'll also need to solve the currency chaos. Nobody survives hyperinflation. Sooner or later, it pushes you out. I've spoken about how the dollar can be weaponized in many articles. August 2018, I was speaking about currency puzzles and a weaponized dollar. I said it could metasize into an AK-47, and I was referring to financial warfare strategies. Well, here, you did not need to impose it. The underlying conditions were already a petri dish for this kind of event. Be Sonblast, the speech we've been waiting for all our lives, is being given by Awad Ibnouf, war criminal and vice president of war criminal Bashir. We're not going home just yet. I said, what's the market on this fellow? Referencing that previous tweet. Number of days, because it's certainly not going to last 2 years. In January, when events were unfolding in Gabon, I said what we're watching across this continent, whether it's Gabon, Sudan, or DR Congo, is a kind of tipping point moment, I said, and it's unfolded in that way. And then I was quoting Antonio Gramsci in another article. The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born, the birth pangs of a new Africa. I like this tweet. The sit-in site looks like a portal into tomorrow's Sudan. The sit-in site is the future. The Army General is the past. One wants to be born, one needs to die. It has all the signs of the promising future we waited to tear out of evil's grasp. But this is beautiful. Be Sonblast again. In this little clip, a soldier from Sudan's armed forces playing his saxophone, surrounded by protesters who are chanting, one of the popular Darfuri songs in defying the curfew outside the army's headquarters. Protesters today chanting the revolution has only just begun in response to the new transitional government formed by the regime Old Guard. Germa Mohammed, unseating a dictator is one thing, clearing the mess they leave behind is an entirely different ballgame. With the fragility of South Sudan, volatility of Ethiopia, unease in Eritrea, failed state in Somalia, the whole region may plunge into chaos. I did a tweet yesterday when I said, "Cometh the moment, cometh the woman," and I was referring to Ayala Saleh and asking whether she's a 21st century African revolutionary icon. And I was saying the old men are being undone by girl power. Patrick Smith, who's the editor of Africa Confidential, told Middle East Eye, "It has taken 1 million Sudanese, mostly women, to get rid of this regime. They want to know where the rest of the world has been all this time. It is a cultural revolution as much as a political one, and it is being driven by young women." This is from Joyce Karam, the crowds outside Bashir headquarters in Khartoum. That was at a time when they were still calling for his ouster. And as long as the crowd remains 1 million strong and in the street, it has won. And that goes back to Kapuscinski. If the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. Paul Virilio, the revolutionary contingent, attains its ideal form not in the place of production, and that's where the Army General wants to get them back to, but in the street, which is where they exercise significant leverage, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. And in 2014, in November, when beautiful Blaise Compaoré was overthrown in Ouagadougou, I wrote an article then, and I said we need to ask ourselves how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? Is it 100? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? This is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent can't go. And both the incumbent in Sudan and the incumbent in Algeria did not have the unity of purpose to do such a thing. The question is, will this fellow try and do something like that? I like this. They are not strong men. They are fragile to the point of drowning millions of Africans in sorrow. In Algeria, the popular movement, demonstrators insisted, was peaceful, civic-minded. It was sudden, spontaneous, and overwhelming. It caught a complacent and sclerotic regime completely off guard. I wrote a piece about President Bouteflika, the wheelchair-bound in Africa. In particular, I said a lot of leadership is in the departure lounge. Mail and Guardian, large number of countries in Africa are governed by an increasingly entrenched and uncompromising group of old men. Algeria, Sudan, and dangers of presidents for life. This is Professor Nick Cheeseman. And he's going in depth and looking at Nkurunziza, Cameroon's Paul Biya, Idris Deby, Yoweri Museveni, amongst others. He calls it popular uprisings against gerontocratic leaders. Worth a read. Now let's move on to the story of Julian Assange. And let me say this firstly before we go into what I'm going to say. He performed tremendously good work. For example, that Iraqi episode where the American forces killed defenseless civilians in a double tap strike. A double tap strike is when you hit somewhere, then people come to help and you hit it again, killing those people who've come to help. that was he served a purpose which transcended national boundaries in releasing that kind of information. Molly McHugh says, if you must use a photo of Assange today, please use an updated one like this. And Seth Abrahamson was asking why the Kremlin was getting involved. And I said, the point is, Seth, at moments like this, the Kremlin forgets to stay non-linear, and you can see the linearity in plain sight because everyone starts complaining, whether it's Greenwald, the Kremlin. There's so many characters and it's not difficult. These are the moments when you see those connections and you can connect the dots. In a piece I wrote in 2016 when I essentially accused WikiLeaks of interfering in the US election on behalf of Donald Trump, I said the first thing is plausible deniability. You want to be able to be at one remove from the other, and the whole chain needs to be non-linear. And I said this plausible deniability and non-linearity. Now, Mr. Trump, according to L. Rosen, put Mr. Stone on the speakerphone. Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange. Julian Assange cries out as he's being taken out of the Ecuadorian embassy that the UK must resist this attempt by the Trump administration. And I said it's Shakespearean. Assange moved the needle for President Trump, and now President Trump wants his head on a platter. And the reason for that is related to 2016. There are many cultists on this site, but the Assange cultists are the worst. Assange was the agent of a proto-fascist state, Russia, to undermine democracy. This is fascist behavior. Anyone on the left should abhor what he did, not celebrate it. And I think that's the point. He acted on the behest of a foreign power. And that, for me, is the actual crime more than anything else. And as I said, it's very Shakespearean. Assange is being charged in the US with a hack conspiracy tied to Chelsea Manning, which was the connection that released that Iraq footage. This is a Rupley video of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's arrest by British police. And the point is, it's a little bit like Hamlet. You see that you can connect the dots in these sorts of moments because everyone starts protesting. And to quote Hamlet, the lady doth protest too much. The article about his interference and his involvement was an article I wrote called "We Have a Deviate Tomahawk." And I said then, from feeding the hothouse conspiracy frenzy online, a constant state of destabilized perception, timely and judicious doses of WikiLeaks leaks, which drained Hillary's bona fides and her turnout and motivated Trump's, what we have witnessed is something remarkable and noteworthy. The government has imposed other restrictions limiting his visitors and requiring him to clean his bathroom and look after his cat. DPRK News tweeted, tongue-in-cheek, the fate of Julian Assange's cat remains shrouded in mystery. I said it exited in his goblin-like beard.